Okay, we're going to work on graphing today. Two types of forms of equations. One is the slope-intercept form of an equation, and the other is the standard form of an equation. The slope-intercept form of an equation is y equals mx plus b, with m being the slope and b being the y-intercept. This is one we've talked about in the previous video, and here's an example of how it works. We've got y equals 3x minus 3, and you line up your m and your b so that you can see clearly that the m, or the slope, is negative 3, and the b is also, in this case, negative 3. So that's your y-intercept form of an equation. One thing we also talked about is that, another way of thinking about this, is that the number before, you can say this, is that the number before the x is the slope, and the number after the x is the y-intercept. That's just another way of thinking about it. It's intuitive, right? The number before the x is the slope, or m, and the number after the x term is, this one, negative 3, is the y-intercept. So that's an easy way to recognize it. But the problem is, what happens if this doesn't come in this form? In other words, we don't get it as y equals something. Right now, it's all laid out there perfectly for us, so it's really easy to tell what the slope and what the y-intercept are. But what happens when the equation comes in another form? Well, that's a good question. If the equation comes in another form, solve for y. Well, that's intuitive. It makes total sense, right? Let's look at an example. If you've got something like minus 3x plus y equals 7, right? Minus 3x plus y equals 7 is not in the slope-intercept form of an equation. So we've got to do something about that. And quite honestly, the simplest thing to do is just solve for y. And the way to do that is to go back to your equation solving principles, add 3x on both sides, and we get y equals 3x plus 7. You've done it. You know how to do it. It's not that hard a conversion. And sometimes we're going to do another example in a minute where you end up with a fraction, but actually a fraction makes it easier to plot the slope. So this kind of, if you're good with algebra, especially if you're good with equation solving, this is a quick and easy conversion from the slope, or from a standard form of an equation, or something like that, over to the y-intercept form of an equation. So we've got y equals 3x plus 7, and then again we have m equals 3, b equals 7. The slope is 3, the y-intercept is 7. We're not going to graph that right now, but in a minute we will. And when we graph, remember, we need to write this as a fraction, 3 over 1, and this as an ordered pair. That's the way to graph it, because the ordered pair is needed because we need to find it as a point, graph it as a point, and the slope is needed as a fraction because it's going to tell us the rise over the run. And in other words, we're going to go up 3 and to the right 1 after we've gone to the point 0.7. That's what graphing is all about, and that's why we always take the number that we have for slope and put it in the form of a fraction, and we always take the number that we have for the y-intercept and we put it in the form of a point. Now, moving right along, let's look at another example. We've got minus 7x minus 2y. That happens to be, in a moment you're going to see, that happens to be the standard form of an equation. Well, okay, what do? Well, as we just said, we are going to solve for y. And I know, in order to see what we're talking about, we're going to circle that y. That's going to be the star of the show. And in order for the star of the show to shine, it has to be alone. Well, what do? We subtract 7x on both sides. Remember, the golden rule of equation solving is subtract, whatever you do on the left-hand side, you've got to do on your right-hand side. You can't do it on one side, not the other. So in this case, we subtract 7x in order to make this 0. In order to make that equal to nothing, cancel it out, we subtract 7x on both sides. We're left with minus 2y and 6 minus 7x, or in terms of our equation, we want to put the minus 7x before the 6. We do, and it's looking a lot like slope-intercept form already. The only problem is we have a minus 2 in there. That's not really a problem because you know how to solve for y and you know what to do with that negative 2. You've done it many times in solving two-step equations. Right now our second step is to divide the negative 2, and we do, and we get y equals, in a moment we're going to write it down, y equals minus 7x, okay, y equals minus 7x y equals minus 7, or sorry, plus 7 over 2x plus 3. right? Because these two minuses divide into a positive. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. And again, the same thing. Minus 6 divided by negative 2 is equal to positive 3. And so we already have, this is the form mx plus b. We already have our slope in the form of a fraction. And now our y-intercept, we put it in the form of a point, which is 0, 3. Remember, y-intercept points are always an ordered pair starting with 0 because your x part of the graph is not moving. We're not going right or left. We're simply going up 3 on the graph, which we're going to do in a minute. We haven't got that going yet, but in a minute we're going to start graphing. So let's start looking at a question where we can graph, and we're going to look at that from the point of view of what is called the standard form. All right. So